good evening, or good morning, depending on when you found this. Tonight's story is meant to be listened to slowly, in the dark, with rain or fire sounds in the background. Before we begin, I'm curious, where are you listening from? And what made you press play tonight? If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, subscribe and click the notification bell to stay connected. The door swung open before my key touched the lock. That should have been the first warning, but it was raining a cold October drizzle that had turned the winding roads of Ski Mountain Road into sheets of black glass sand. All I wanted was dry heat. The cabin smelled of cedar and something else, something floral and old, like dried lavender pressed between pages. I dropped my bag on the hardwood floor and noticed the phone on the coffee table. It was clearly not mine, was in my jacket pocket. Buzzing with a text from my mother I hadn't read yet. The screen on that table was lit, displaying a message in clean Helvetica. Welcome back, Jenna. I'd never been to Gatlinburg before. Never told the host. My name only used a screen name on the booking platform. The rain kept falling. The cabin kept breathing around me, its heat vents sighing. I picked up the phone. The screen flickered and changed. Take off your shoes. I made tea. I set the phone down carefully, like it might bite. The tea on the counter was steam curl warm. In a mug I recognized from the listing, photo chanthron ceramic, ugly green glaze. I hadn't made it. The cabin had a full kitchen, granite countertops, a Keurig, but this was a kettle brew, loose leaf, the strainer sitting beside the mug. I walked through every living room with stone fireplace, bedroom with a quilt that looked Amish, bathroom with clawfoot tub. No one else was here. I checked the closets. I checked under the bed. The phone on the coffee table had gone dark. But when I looked at it from across the room, the screen lit up again. One word, drink. I told myself it was a smart home feature. Some host set up a welcome script, maybe triggered by the booking calendar, but the booking site specifically stated, no smart devices, no cameras, total privacy. I poured the tea down the sink and sat on the couch, watching the door I hadn't unlocked swing slowly shut on its own. My name is Jenna Hartley. I'm 29, a freelance graphic designer, and the reason I was in a remote cabin in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, with nothing but a broken heart and a looming deadline, is that I'm too trusting. It's not a humble, Bradgett's a genuine flaw. I believe people when they say rustic, no Wi-Fi, perfect for disconnecting. I believe 5-star reviews from accounts that were created last week. I believe a host named Ridge, who only communicated through a generic profile photo of a mountain silhouette. My boyfriend of 4 years had left me in August He said I was too comfortable with strangers. I thought he was being paranoid. He was right about a lot of things, but that doesn't mean I'll admit it. The cabin was supposed to be a reset. 3 days of working on a branding kit for a vegan bakery, hiking the trails around Mount LeConte, maybe writing in a journal. Instead, I was hunched over my laptop, refreshing the booking page, trying to find the smart home assistant clause I must have missed. There was no such clause, only a note from Ridge. Make yourself at home. I'll check in after your stay. I looked up at the phone on the coffee table. It was dead now, totally black, but I swear I saw my reflection in the screen mouth, a word before my own lips moved. I didn't sleep that first night. Not really. I lay in the queen bed, staring at the wardrobe door, which I'd left 3 inches open because I'd checked inside twice and found nothing but an extra quilt. The handprint on the window had appeared around midnight, a small palm, fingers spread, pressed from the outside. I was on the 2nd floor. The window overlooked a sheer drop into a rhododendron thicket. No balcony, no ledge. I tried to rationalize it. Condensation, a smudge from the previous guest, maybe an animal pressing against the glass. But the fingers were too long, the thumb too far from the index finger. It looked like my hand. I held my own hand up to the glass, lined it up with the print. It matched perfectly. I pulled the curtain closed and didn't look again. Around 3 in the morning, I heard typing from the living room. Not automatic, not a machine. The rhythm of someone reading stop, think, tap, tap, tap. I grabbed my phone to call the host, but the number I'd saved was gone. In its place was a single contact, you. I didn't call. I waited until the typing stopped. Then I heard the tea kettle whistle. Sunrise came gray and watery through the blinds, and I found the notes. They were everywhere tucked into the sugar bowl, folded under the salt shaker, taped to the refrigerator door, wedged into the spine of a magazine on the side table, all of them written in my handwriting. I know my own cursiveth way I loop my Y's, the way my capital J leans slightly to the left. Each note said the same thing: don't leave. I counted 11 of them before I stopped. My hands were shaking. I opened my laptop and checked the booking platform again. The listing had changed. The photos now showed a cabin. I didn't recognize different furniture, different curtains, and a portrait on the wall that wasn't there when I arrived. The portrait was of a woman with dark hair. My hair, but the face was wrong. The eyes were too far apart, the smile too wide. I spent the morning searching for cameras. I know what you're thinking, creepy Airbnb, hidden lenses, someone watching from a van. I checked every smoke detector, every vent, every power outlet. I used the flashlight on my phone and looked for pinhole lenses. I found nothing, but I did find something else. Behind the baseboard near the fridge, a small hole that led into the wall cavity. I pushed my phone camera to it, took a photo, and the image showed a tunnel, a narrow, earthen passage lined with roots. The cabin had a basement I hadn't seen. I went back to the closet where I'd checked for a staircase. The floor was solid, no hatch, but the hole in the baseboard suggested there was space below the foundation. I pressed my ear to the floorboards and heard movement, not footsteps, but something dragging, like fabric across gravel, and then a voice, faint and muffled. My own voice, humming a song I hadn't heard since childhood. The phone on the coffee table buzzed. I didn't want to look, but I did. The screen showed a live feed camera angle from inside the wall cavity. A figure was crawling toward the hole. It had my face. It smiled with too many teeth. I decided to leave. That was the rational choice. Pack my bag, get in the car, drive back to the rental agency in Gatlinburg, and file a complaint. I didn't care about the deposit. I didn't care about the project. I just wanted to be anywhere else. But the car wouldn't start. The battery was fine as lights came on. The radio played a static-laced country song, but the engine turned over with a wet, choking sound, and then died. I tried 3 times. On the 3rd attempt, the radio switched to a voice. My mother's voice saying, "Jenna, you're not coming home tonight." The words were not from any call I remembered. They were stitched together, slightly off rhythm, like a text-to-speech program forced to mimic her tone. I killed the ignition and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, breathing in the smell of wet upholstery and decaying leaves. Through the windshield, I saw the cabin's porch light flick on. I hadn't turned it on. The front door opened slowly, and a figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light inside. It was too tall for me, too thin, but when it raised a hand and waved, the motion was exactly mine. I didn't want to go back inside, but the rain had turned into a storm, and the nearest neighbor was a mile down a gravel road with no cell service. I could walk, but the forest around me had changed. The trees looked older, gnarled, their branches forming shapes that reminded me of arms. I stood on the front step, soaked to the bone, and the figure was gone. The door was wide open, revealing the living room exactly as I'd left it, except the notes were gone. The phone was gone. The tea kettle was silent. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me with a soft click. I turned to open it, but the lock had engaged a deadbolt I hadn't used. It turned itself. I heard typing from the bedroom, slow, deliberate, I walked toward it, and when I pushed the door open, I saw my laptop open on the bed, the screen glowing. A document was open, titled Jenna's Journal. It was filled with entries I never wrote, days of observations, describing my morning coffee, my shower habits, the way I scratched my elbow when I was nervous. The most recent entry was time-stamped 2 minutes ago. She's back now. She'll finally understand. Tell me in the comments if you caught what just happened. I slammed the laptop shut. The typing continued from the closet. The typing was coming from behind the bookcase. I'd noticed it earlier, a tall oak shelf filled with leather-bound books, mostly local history and hiking guides. Now my phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m., and I almost didn't look. I was already half asleep, curled under a thin quilt in a bedroom that smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. The cabin in Eureka Springs had seemed charming when I booked it, tucked into the Ozark Hills, far from my usual life in Tulsa. But the notification on my screen wasn't a reminder or a spam email. It was a text from an unsaved number, the preview line reading, "You left the kitchen light on, Maya. Turn it off before the bears see." I froze, thumb hovering over the message. The kitchen light was off. Id checked twice before coming to bed, because I hate wasting electricity. I opened the text anyway. The sender had no name, no photo, just a gray silhouette. The message thread was empty, except for that single line. I looked at the ceiling, at the smoke detector, at the tiny camera lens I thought Id spotted earlier, but dismissed. My heart thumped slow and heavy. I sat there for a full minute, telling myself it was a prank. The cabin's host, a man named James, who'd sent a very professional welcome email, had mentioned a security system. Maybe it detected motion and auto-generated a message. But that didn't explain the before the bears see part. I got up, barefoot on the cold hardwood floors, and padded into the kitchen. The light was off. I didn't touch the switch. I stood in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the settling creaks of old wood. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo, a picture of me, standing right there in the kitchen, backlit by the open fridge door. The angle was from above, slightly tilted. A ceiling-mounted camera, maybe. The caption read, "Better. That light attracts things you can't see." I nearly dropped the phone. I spun around, looking for a lens, a wire, anything. There was a tiny pinhole in the crown molding above the pantry. I saw it glint once before I ran back to the bedroom and locked the door to understand why I was alone in that cabin. You need to know what I was running from. My name is Maya Chen. I am 28, and I've worked as a freelance graphic designer for the last 4 years. My work is solid, but my personal life is a landfill of bad choices. The most recent one was Greg, a consultant I'd been seeing for 8 months. He was charming, attentive, and he had a habit of showing up at places I'd mentioned, in passing the coffee shop I liked, the bookstore I browsed on weekends. I thought it was romantic. My sister called it a red flag, the size of a billboard. I ignored her until the night I found him sitting in his car across the street from my apartment at 1 a.m., watching my window. I broke it off, changed my locks, and decided I needed distance. A solo retreat. No notifications. No people. Just me and the Ozark Woods. I booked the Crescent Cabin on Airbnb because the photos showed a porch swing, a stone fireplace, and a trail that led to a hidden waterfall. It looked peaceful. It looked safe. I arrived at the cabin around 6 p.m. 2 days ago. The drive from Tulsa was just under 2 hours, and I'd spent most of it listening to a true crime podcast about a missing hiker in the same region. I turned it off when I hit the gravel road that curved up into the hills. The cabin sat at the end of a narrow lane, surrounded by oak and pine. It was exactly as pictured, a 1-bedroom structure with a wraparound porch, a stone chimney, and a porch swing that swayed gently despite the still air. I used a code from the host to unlock a key box, retrieved the key, and let myself in. The interior was cozy. Exposed beams, a wood-burning stove, a kitchen with a farmhouse sink. A handwritten note on the counter read, "Welcome, Maya. Help yourself to coffee and snacks. Wi-Fi password is Crescent Moon. Call or text if you need anything, James." I tucked the note under a magnet shaped like a raccoon and unpacked. Everything felt normal. Too normal. The first sign that something was wrong came on my first full day. I'd spent the morning hiking the trail behind the cabin, a steep, rocky path that wound past a small creek. By noon, I was back, showered, and ready to work. I opened my laptop on the kitchen table, connected to the Wi-Fi, and started editing a logo for a client. A few minutes in, my cursor moved on its own. It didn't jump or lag, it glided smoothly across the screen. Closing my editing software and opening a blank text file. Then words appeared, one letter at a time. "Did you enjoy the waterfall? I saw you take your shoes off." I slammed the laptop shut. My pulse roared in my ears. The cabin had windows on all sides, but the trees were thick. If someone was outside, I wouldn't see them until they pressed their face against the glass. I checked the windows. I checked the door. I pulled out my phone and called the host. The number went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't touch the laptop for the rest of that day. Instead, I sat on the porch with a book I couldn't read, my eyes scanning the tree line every few seconds. The Wi-Fi was still on. My phone had service, but I didn't trust any of it. When the sun dipped behind the hills, I went inside, locked everything, and pushed a chair under the front door handle. I lay on the bed, trying to sleep, when I heard it. A soft tapping, like fingernails on glass. But it wasn't the windows. It was the laptop. The lid was still closed, but the tapping came from the trackpad area. Someone pressing the click button. Repeatedly, deliberately. I didn't get up. I pulled the covers over my head and waited until the sound stopped. The next morning, I opened the laptop. The text file was still open, but there was a new message at the bottom. You didn't read the guest book, did you? Look under the mattress. My stomach turned. I didn't want to look, but I did. I found a journal. It was old, the cover cracked, the pages yellowed and soft. Inside, written in cramped handwriting, was someone else's account of staying in this same cabin. The first entry was dated 6 months ago. It started cheerful enough a couple, celebrating their anniversary, hiking, cooking dinner, enjoying the quiet. But by the third page, the tone shifted. We keep hearing footsteps upstairs. But this is a single-story cabin. One entry read, the lights turn on by themselves at night. I unplugged the lamp, and it still glowed. Another entry, a week later. We tried to leave early, but the car wouldn't start. The mechanic said there was nothing wrong. I think someone is watching us. I think they're in the walls. The final entry was dated the day before they had planned to check out. It was just a single sentence, scratched so hard the pen tore the paper. I saw a man in the reflection of the microwave. He was standing behind my husband, but my husband was alone in the room. I closed the journal and shoved it back under the mattress. My hands were shaking. I spent the rest of that morning inspecting the cabin. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I learned quickly. Behind the vent in the bathroom, I found a small microphone. Under the nightstand, a USB-shaped device that looked like a charger, but had no brand name. In the smoke detector, a tiny lens that caught the light when I angled my phone's flashlight at it. Someone had wired this place like a laboratory. I took photos of everything, then tried to call the police. The call dropped. I tried again, dropped. Every number I dialed failed, but my data still worked. That's when I realized the cabin wasn't cut off from the outside world. It was rigged so that I could only receive what it wanted me to receive. And whoever was controlling, it wanted me to see the evidence. They wanted me to know. Think about this. If your air started sending you messages about your private conversations. Would you stay or run? I decided to run. I threw my clothes into the suitcase, ignoring the neat packing it done 2 days ago. I grabbed my laptop, the journal, my phone. I was at the front door, hand on the deadbolt, when my phone buzzed again. I looked down. A new message. You won't make it to the car. The gravel is loose. You'll twist your ankle. Better to wait until morning. I closed the message. Then another came. I've seen you fall. You're a clumsy. Remember the curb at the coffee shop. The one Greg had to help you off. I was there too. My breath caught. That was a detail no one would know unless they'd been watching me for weeks. I didn't go outside. I backed away from the door, trembling, and sat on the floor in the center of the living room. The cabin felt smaller. The walls seemed to lean inward. I looked at the bathroom mirror from my spot on the floor. My reflection looked back, but for a split second, it wasn't making the same expression I was. Its lips were frozen in a smile I hadn't worn. I didn't sleep that night. I sat against the wall, back to the corner, watching all the entrances. The phone stayed in my hand, dark. The laptop remained closed on the table. At one point, a floorboard creaked in the kitchen. I didn't move. The creak came again, closer. Then the voice, not from a speaker, not from the phone. It came from the smoke detector above the dining area. A man's voice, calm and low, like a narrator on a documentary. You're doing the right thing by staying still, Maya. The people who panic never last long. They run into the woods. They call for help that doesn't come. And they're never seen again. But you're smart. You're cautious. That's why I chose you. The voice paused. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and shallow. You want to know who I am, don't you? Look in the journal, page 47. I left a note for you. I didn't want to, but my hand moved, as if pulled, and I opened the journal to the page he denamed. There, in the same cramped handwriting, was a message I hadn't seen before. Maya checked the floorboards under the rug. The rug was heavy, braided wool in faded reds and browns. I'd walked over it a dozen times without noticing the slight unevenness beneath. When I pulled it back, the trapdoor was obvious, a square of wood with an inset iron ring, flush with the floor. The wood was dark, oiled, maintained. A small lug hung from a hasp. It wasn't engaged. I could open it. I didn't want to, but I knew that if I didn't, the voice would keep talking, keep watching, keep pulling strings. I knelt down, hooked my fingers under the ring, and lifted. The wood groaned, then gave way. A ladder descended into darkness. Cold air rose up, smelling of earth and something metallic, like old coins. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam barely reached the bottom. I saw concrete floor, a chair, a table, and on the table, a camera pointing up directly at me. I was in the picture he was taking. I slammed the trapdoor shut and shoved the rug back over it, heart hammering. I couldn't stay above the trapdoor. I scrambled across the room, pressed my back against the wall farthest from the rug, and wrapped my arms around my knees. The voice was silent now, but the air in the cabin felt denser, charged. I tried to think clearly. He knew I was here. He had cameras in every room. He had access to my phone, my laptop, maybe even my car. The only way out was to play his game until I found a vulnerability. I opened the journal again, flipping past page 47. There were more entries after that written by the same hand, but the tone had changed. It was no longer a diary. It was a log. Times, dates, observations. Subject 3 arrived late. Broke down outside Bentonville. Had to hitchhike. I tracked her for 3 days before she checked in. Subject 4 was a skeptic. Took 6 nights to break. The trapdoor worked eventually, and then near the back. Subject 11, Maya C. High value. Picked based on online habits. She's been in unstable relationships. I woke to the sound of my own breath, too loud in the dead air. The bedside clock read 3:11 a.m. The room was colder than it had any right to be in a Tucson October. I lay still, staring at the ceiling fan, trying to convince myself the creak it heard was just the house settling. But it'd been here 3 weeks. I knew the sounds of this house. Lived in a 1930s bungalow on Mesquite Drive. Rented cheap through a realtor who warned me it needed character adjustments. That creak wasn't wood. It was footsteps coming from the hallway. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. My eyes fixed on the doorfrometh one that led from my bedroom into the narrow corridor that ran past the bathroom, the linen closet, and ended at the front door. That's when I saw the shadow. It didn't belong to any object. It was a Chapital, thin, with a head that tilted slightly to the left breast, against the wall, like it had been painted there. It didn't move, just stood. I blinked, and it was gone. I sat up, my back against the headboard, and listened. The house had gone silent again. No footsteps. No creaks, just the hum of the refrigerator 3 rooms away. I told myself it was a trick of light. The street lamp outside casts weird angles through the blinds. That's normal. That's rational. That's what I do. I rationalize. I am Nora Chen, 28, freelance graphic designer. I moved here from Phoenix after a breakup, looking for quiet, for a place where I could think without the noise of shared walls. My only real flaw, if you want to call it that, is that I trust logic too much. I refuse to believe anything until I see hard evidence. Ghost stories are for people who need explanations for creaky pipes. So I got up. I walked to the hallway. The nightlight was still on, a small orange glow near the baseboard. The door to the linen closet stood slightly ajar. I pushed it shut, felt the latch click. Then I turned back to bed and tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still standing right behind me, just out of sight. The next morning, I did what any rational person would do. I Googled the address, 1423 Mesquite Drive, Tucson, Arizona. The listing photos showed the same beige stucco walls, the same rusted wrought iron gate out front. I found the obituary in the Arizona Daily Star archives. Harold Finch, 78, retired postal worker, died November 12, 2019. Survived by a daughter in Flagstaff. The article included a photo of a gaunt man with deep-set eyes and a thin mustache. He looked ordinary. I studied his face, trying to match it to the shadow I'd seen. The shadow had no features, just a silhouette, but the tilt of the head, that slight lean to the left, was familiar. I'd seen it in the hallway. I told myself I was creating connections where none existed. That's what the brain does. Pattern recognition run wild. I went for a walk around the neighborhood. Dry heat, Palo Verde trees, the distant hum of Interstate 10. I passed a neighbor trimming a bougainvillea. She smiled, but her eyes lingered on my house a beat too long. "You're the new renter," she said. "How's the old place treating you?" I said fine. She nodded, then added, almost casually, "Harold used to sit on that porch every evening. He was a quiet man, kept to himself, but he always said the house talked to him." I laughed it off, but her words followed me home. By the third night, the shadow came back. I saw it in the bathroom mirror. I was brushing my teeth, the water running, steam clouding the glass. I wiped a circle clear. With my pomade, there it was. Behind me, in the doorway, a tall, dark shape, head tilted left, arms hanging at its sides. I spun around. The doorway was empty. The bathroom was empty. I stood there, toothbrush dripping onto the tile. My heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. I told myself it was a reflection of the shower curtain, but the shower curtain was white, not black, and it didn't have a head. I forced myself to finish brushing, then walked to the bedroom with the lights on full blast. I slept with the lamp on that night. The shadow didn't come into my room, not then, but I felt it in the hallway. A presence, a weight in the air. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the door, waiting. The next day, I decided to investigate. I took a flashlight and examined the hallway wall where the shadow had appeared. The paint was a neutral beige, a little worn near the baseboard, but when I shone the light at a low angle, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A shadow stain, a faint yellowish discoloration in the shape of a human form. It was about 6 feet tall, with a head that leaned left. I ran my fingers over it. The wall felt dry, normal. No moisture, no mold. I measured it, exactly where the shadow had stood. I told myself it was just years of sun bleaching. Or maybe some furniture once sat against that spot. But the shape was too precise, too human. I tried to scrub it off with a sponge and warm water. It didn't fade. I spent the afternoon convincing myself I was overreacting. I called a friend in Phoenix, told her the house felt weird. She laughed. You're just not used to living alone. Give it a month. I wanted to believe her, but that night I set up my phone to record the hallway. I propped it on a stack of books in the bedroom doorway, facing toward the linen closet. Infrared mode off. I wanted clear footage. Then I went to sleep, or tried to. The footage was grainy. My phone's night mode is decent, but in near total darkness, everything looks like a smudge. I scrolled through the video at double speed. Nothing for hours. Then at 3:11 a.m. the same time woken the previous night the image on the screen flickered. I paused, watched frame by frame. The hallway was empty. Then, over the course of about 20 framesless, then a seconded dark shape bled into existence near the middle of the corridor. It wasn't moving. It just appeared, like a photographic negative developing in reverse. It stayed there, motionless, for about 30 seconds. Then it faded out, not walking away, just dissolving. I watched the clip a dozen times, each time the same thing. A shadow that appeared from nothing. No figure entering the frame. No light source shifting. Just an absence of light forming in the middle of my hallway. I was shaking. I wanted to call someone, but who? My rational mind had no explanation. I started digging deeper into Harold Finch. I called the county assessor's office, pretending to be a researcher for a historical project. They told me the house had been sold twice after Harold's death. Both buyers moved out within 6 months. I found the full police report, online public record. Harold Finch's death was ruled a heart attack. The responding officer noted that the body was discovered by a neighbor who noticed newspapers piling up. The report described I didn't run. I turned slowly, the flashlight gripped in my hand. The hallway was empty, but the air was wrong. It shimmered slightly, like heat rising off asphalt, but the house was cool. The temperature had dropped at least 5 degrees since it started reading. I saw my breath fog in the air. It was October in Tucson, still warm outside, but inside it had gone cold. I walked to the hallway, one step at a time. The floorboards creaked under my weight. When I reached the spot where the shadow had appeared, I stopped. I could feel something. Not a touch, but a pressure, like standing too close to a speaker at a concert. A low, thrumming vibration in my chest. I whispered, "Harold." No answer, but the pressure increased. I felt a hand close around my wrist, unmistakably fingers wrapping around my skin. I yanked away and stumbled backward, hitting the living room wall. I looked at my wrist. There was no mark, but I could still feel the cold, like ice had been pressed against my pulse point. I ran outside, sat on the porch in the warm desert evening, shaking. I didn't go back inside until the sun came up. I spent that night at a motel, the Super 8 off I-10 near Speedway. The room was cheap. The sheets smelled like bleach, and I didn't sleep. I kept looking at my wrist. The cold had faded, but the memory of it stayed. In the morning, I went back to the house. I had to. My laptop, my work files, my clothes, everything was still inside. I walked through the front door with the sunlight pouring in, trying to reclaim the space as normal. I checked every room. The hallway was bright, the shadow stain barely visible in the daylight. I decided to search for more information. I typed Harold Finch shadow figure into a paranormal forum. One result, a post from 2020, titled "He's Still There, 1423 Mesquite Drive." The author wrote, "I rented this house for 2 months. Every night, I saw a tall shadow in the hallway. It never hurt me, but it watched. I found out later the previous owner died there. I think he's stuck. He doesn't know he's dead. He's waiting for something." The post ended with, "I left, but I still see him sometimes. In my dreams, always at the end of a hallway." I closed the laptop. I knew I should leave too, but I couldn't, because the shadow hadn't just watched me. It had touched me, and I needed to know why. I found myself kneeling in front of the stain, my hand hovering an inch from the wall. The temperature had dropped again. The house was silent, except for the ticking of a wall clock I didn't remember owning. I touched the stain. My fingers sank into the wall as if it were wet plaster, but the surface felt solid. The cold seeped into my fingertips. I pulled my hand back. There was a residue on my fingers, like soot. I looked at the stain. It had grown darker. The shape was more defined now. I could see the outline of fingers, the curve of a shoulder. It It was like the shadow was becoming more real. I stood up, my legs weak. I backed away, but I couldn't stop staring. The shadow stain seemed to pulse. Like a heartbeat, I blinked, and for just a split second, I saw it move. The head turned, facing me. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed my keys. I was done. I was leaving. But as I reached the front door, I heard a voice. Not loud, just a whisper. It said, "Don't go." I froze at the threshold. The voice was clear. A man's voice, dry and thin, like old paper. "Don't go." I turned my head. The hallway was dark to dark for 2 p.m. The sunlight from outside seemed to stop at the doorway as Marcus Webb's eyes were open, but nothing else moved. The ceiling above him was a familiar landscape of hairline cracks and water stains. But tonight it looked foreign, like the ceiling of someone else's bedroom. He could feel the cool air from the window pressing against his exposed arms. But there was a weight on his chest that had nothing to do with the blankets. His lungs demanded air, but his diaphragm refused to cooperate. He experienced sleep paralysis before the textbooks called it an intrusion of REM atonia into waking consciousness, but this was different. There was a pressure against his left ankle, precise and deliberate, like 3 fingers pressing into the tendon. He couldn't turn his head to see what was there. The clock on his nightstand read 3:47 a.m. The seconds ticked by with the slow, sticky crawl of honey in winter. Marcus Webb, 34 years old, freelance web developer, and resident of a crumbling Victorian duplex in Portland, Oregon's Alphabet District, had been documenting his sleep for exactly 23 days. The sleep study camera he ordered from Amazon sat mounted on a tripod in the corner of his bedroom. Its infrared LEDs casting an invisible net across everything he did while unconscious. He started recording after the 3rd night of waking up with bruises he couldn't explain. Small circular marks on his forearms and calves that looked like someone had pressed thumbs into his flesh. The sleep doctor at OHSU had dismissed it. Hypnic jerks, Shed said, not looking up from her clipboard. Your body is adjusting to the new medication. But Marcus knew his body. He lived in it for 34 years. He knew the difference between a muscle spasm and 3 distinct points of pressure applied by something that had fingers. The backstory Marcus had constructed for himself was simple enough. He moved into the duplex on Northwest Everett Street 8 months ago. After his divorce from Lena became final, the house was cheap because it was haunted not in the way people joked about, but in the way real estate agents avoided mentioning. The previous tenant had been a retired librarian named Dorothy Hempstead, who died in the upstairs bathroom. Cardiac event, according to the police report Marcus had found online. But the paramedics had noted something strange in the incident log. Contusions on her wrists, consistent with restraint. The case had been closed as natural causes, with no autopsy ordered. Marcus had ignored the warning signs because the rent was $700 below market rate. He was a rational man. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in plumbing inspections and radon tests, and the measurable, quantifiable world of cause and effect. His flaw the one that his therapist in Northwest Portland had gently prodded at for 18 months was a compulsive need to understand things that resisted understanding. Marcus couldn't leave a mystery alone. He once spent 3 weeks reconstructing the timeline of a minor car accident that had dented his bumper, calling insurance adjusters and requesting traffic cam footage until he'd proven that the other driver had run a red light. The victory had cost him 40 hours and a friendship. So when the sleep paralysis started happening every night, he didn't just accept it. He bought the camera. He set it to record from midnight to 6 a.m. He created a folder on his hard drive labeled Sleep Study and began watching every second of footage, hunched over his laptop, with coffee going cold beside him, looking for a pattern in the static-filled dark. On night 12, Marcus found something. The footage showed his bedroom exactly as expected. The dresser against the far wall, the closed closet door, the dim glow of his alarm clock. At 3:42 a.m., he had rolled onto his back, his face slack with REM sleep. At 3:44 a.m., his body jerked once, but at 3:49 a.m., Marcus had seen the door handle move. Not open, just move. A slight rotation downward, as if someone had tested the latch from the other side. He watched the clip 17 times, zooming in until the pixels dissolved into blocks of gray. The handle definitely turned, but the door itself never opened. The next morning, he checked the lock and found it engaged. He asked his downstairs neighbor, a nursing student named Priya, if she'd been coming up to the second floor at 4 in the morning. Shed looked at him with the careful expression women reserve for men who ask strange questions. No, she said. She worked days. She'd been asleep. The hallucinations during paralysis had evolved. At first, they'd been formless. A sense of presence, a whisper of cold air across his neck. By week 3, they had become specific. A woman in a pale blue housecoat standing in the corner of the room. her back to him, motionless. The first time Marcus saw her in the footage, he nearly dropped his laptop. She was there, on the recording. The camera had captured her. A faint silhouette with no discernible features. Just a shape where no shape should have been. But when he paused and advanced frame by frame, she flickered like a bad signal, present in one frame, gone in the next. He run the footage through editing software, checking for compression artifacts. The program detected no anomalies. The silhouette was either real or imprinted onto the data by some physical process Marcus couldn't name. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office with all the lights on and the bedroom door locked, watching the tape loop over and over. On night 17, the figure turned around. Marcus wasn't in bed to see it. Happen was in the kitchen, getting water, but the camera caught everything. The footage showed him leaving the frame at 2:14 a.m., then returning at 2:17 a.m. But during that 3-minute window, the woman in the housecoat shifted. Her shoulders rotated. Her feet changed position on the hardwood floor. And then she faced the camera directly. Her face was smooth, featureless, like a mannequin head wrapped in pale fabric. No eyes, no mouth, just an expanse of skin-colored, nothing where a face should have been. Marcus watched this in real time, standing in his kitchen with the faucet running and water overflowing from his glass. He didn't feel fear. He felt something worse. The cold confirmation that his reality had developed a crack he couldn't seal. He started cross-referencing the footage with his own memory. Every morning, Marcus recorded voice notes on his phone, describing what he remembered from the night before. The gap between his memory and the camera's recording was widening. He would recall lying perfectly still, unable to move, watching the ceiling. The camera showed him sitting up at 3:15 a.m., facing the corner where the woman stood, his mouth moving in patterns that didn't match any known language. He'd watch himself on screen, this other Marcus who occupied his body while he was trapped inside his own skull, and feel a nausea that bordered on religious terror. On night 21, the figure stepped closer to the bed. The camera's infrared illuminated a hand reaching out, fingers extended toward Marcus' sleeping face. He watched himself, sleeping version of himself, turn his head and open his mouth, as if to receive something. Think about this: if you woke up every morning covered in bruises, speaking languages you don't know, and the only record of what happened showed you inviting something into your lungs, what would you do? Marcus chose documentation. He printed every frame of the figure's approach, taped the images to his wall in sequence, and stared at them until his eyes burned. The progression was clear. The figure was learning. In early recordings, it moved with mechanical jerkiness, like a video game character with corrupted pathfinding. By night 22, its movements were fluid, deliberate, almost graceful. It had learned how to walk in Marcus space. It had learned how to lean over his sleeping body. On night 23, the figure had opened its mouthware. No mouth existed, and Marcus had watched his own chest rise as he inhaled something invisible from its lips. The medical records for Dorothy Hempstead arrived via email on a Tuesday morning. Marcus had filed a public records request with Multnomah County, claiming he was researching the history of his building for a preservation grant. The documents were Thinshed bin 82, with a history of hypertension and a prescription for a mild sedative, but tucked between the pharmacy records and the death certificate was a social worker's note from 3 months before her death. Patient reports waking with unexplained injuries, bruising on forearms, claims she is being fed during the night, referred for psychiatric evaluation. No follow-up scheduled. Marcus read the note 5 times. The word fed appeared twice more in the file. Dorothy had told her home health aide that something was putting things into her mouth while she slept. The aide had noted it as dementia-related confusion. The twist arrived on night 26, and it came from inside Marcus' own head. He was reviewing footage from the previous night when he noticed something he'd missed for weeks. The camera's timestamp was wrong. The files showed recording starting at midnight, but the orientation of shadows in the room didn't match the moon phase. He checked the window. The blinds were drawn, but the slats were aligned differently in the footage than they were in reality. He looked at the clock on his nightstand, visible in the recording. It read 3:47 a.m., but his clock was digital, and it had never not once displayed a time that ended in 47. It displayed even numbers only, hard-coded that way since he bought it at Fred Meyer. The recording showed a clock that didn't exist. The footage wasn't real, or it wasn't from his bedroom. Around this was the thought that made his hands go numb. The camera had been recording a version of his space that existed alongside his own. Marcus dismantled the camera completely. He removed the memory card, the battery, the infrared filter, the lens assembly. He laid every component out on his kitchen table and examined each piece under a magnifying glass. The card was a standard SanDisk, 128 GB. The camera was a Wise Cam V3, mass-produced, unremarkable. He plugged the card into his laptop and opened the file directory. There were 87 video files, each labeled by date. He opened the earliest one night one and watched himself sleeping peacefully. No figure, no movement, no distortion. He opened night 5. Night 12. The door handle didn't move. The footage was clean. Every file on the card was ordinary, mundane footage of a man sleeping alone in his bedroom. The figure, the woman in the housecoat, the hand reaching for his face, the timestamp, anomalous every single anomaly he'd seen, existed only in the copies he'd been watching for 3 weeks. Someone had been editing his files, or something had been inserting footage into his viewing experience, while the original data remained untouched. Marcus checked his video player settings. He checked his graphics card drivers. He ran a full virus scan that found nothing but the copied files, the ones he'd made, and stored on his desktop. The still showed the woman. She was there, frozen in frame, her faceless head tilted as if listening to something Marcus couldn't hear. He deleted every copy. He reformatted the memory card. He took the camera and put it in a box in his closet, vowing to never turn it on again. That night, he locked his bedroom door, wedged a chair under the handle, and lay in bed with the lights on, staring at the ceiling until exhaustion pulled him under. He woke at 3:47 a.m. with the taste of copper in his mouth. The lights were off. The chair was still wedged under the handle, but the door was open, not broken, not force adjust open, swinging inward on its hinges as if it had never been secured. Marcus didn't move. He didn't breathe. The sleep paralysis was back. Iron bands around his chest, sealing his ribs in place. But this time, he could feel something else. A cold point of contact at his lips. Something was pressing against his mouth. He couldn't open his eyes fully, but through his eyelashes, he saw a shape leaning over him, backlit by the dim glow from the hallway. Thank you for listening and spending part of your night here. If you enjoyed this narration, please leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And if you know someone who enjoys falling asleep to rain and dark stories, please share this with them. The rain will continue. Rest well.